Welcome to yet another very different Real Business of Wine session. And this is really definitely going to be the most practical session that we're doing. This is one of the sessions we're doing because we were asked to do it. We had a number of requests from people saying, could we talk about the practicalities of e-commerce? And it's particularly apposite because we had Paul Mabray on the other night or the other day, and he was talking about, as far as he was concerned, we were talking about data with Lily Halstead of Wine Intelligence, and he was saying that for him, particularly as we come out of this current crisis, it's not going to get easier for a lot of companies. It may well be that the big businesses are going to find that they will have got a lot of land that they will have chomped up, and it's up for the small guys who are going to have to find ways of going more directly to the consumer in different ways, and not just consumer, but also being more canny digitally than they've been in the past. So you can see at the top of your screen, hopefully we have four people. From the left, you should have, you may be seeing this in a different format, of course, but anyway, from my left, I can see Polly Hammond, who is my partner in crime, as I always say, on Real Business of Wine, and the person without whom this wouldn't ever have happened. Polly is a digital marketing consultant par excellence. She's American, based in New Zealand, but currently stuck in Barcelona under house arrest there. And Polly works with wineries in New Zealand, but also in the US and elsewhere in various ways of various forms of digital marketing. And Polly will talk about this. So Polly's actually moving from being co-presenter to being interviewee as well, and panelist today. Then I've got Elizabeth Else, who has been in various forms of e-commerce, but she's actually worked for World Duty Free, for the Tate Gallery, for FitFlop, and she's created something called Wine Cellar Door, which is a way of helping people actually to sell wines, and it's got its own online shop, so you can work through that. And I'm sure Elizabeth will explain more about that than I've just been able to make clear. And then Andre Ribeirinho, who is actually with us on our first session. And Andre is a Dega in Portugal, and has been one of the earliest adopters, really, of online stuff in wine. On the other hand, he runs very much offline events in terms of consumer wine tastings and so on, but very much with a view to being practical and helping people actually to sell wine, whether it's to sell wine physically on the day or actually online thereafter. And so Andre's fame at the moment, and he was when Provine was cancelled, Andre leapt in and created something called Portugal Wine Week, which was basically an online Provine for the Portuguese, and with all sorts of sessions and so on. And I'm sure Andre will say a few words about that, because I think it illustrates what we're talking about. But I'd like to hand over to Polly for a second to start with. And Polly, what would you like people to leave this session with? I've got some very good questions, and I know you've got some topics to answer, and I'm sure we're going to get some more questions coming through. But we're in the next 55 minutes, what do you want us to achieve?
So first, I want everybody to figure out how they can get gallery view. That would be really helpful, because I'm seeing some messages in the chat that they can't see our big fat faces on the screen. So there should be a little box in the upper right-hand corner of your view screen that gives you an option for gallery view if you want to see all four of us. So other than that, what I would like for them to get, I think that I would like for wineries to have realistic expectations of what they can accomplish with digital quickly, what they can accomplish in the long run, what things are going to cost, what kind of resources beyond money they're going to need. Because my experience has been, and I'm very vocal about this, I think a lot of people have been sold kind of a false bill of goods about the easiness of digital and this idea of if you build it, they will come. You're muted.
I'm muted. So, Elizabeth, thank you. Elizabeth, I'm going to unmute you as well. You have had as I was saying, a lot of experience in this field. Just go back over that and put a little bit of flesh onto the bones that I provided, please.
I suppose, after doing other things, I ended up in e-commerce about 10 years ago. So I've worked for some big retailers in the UK, implementing online shops for them. So I just do the implementation piece, so almost the opposite of Polly's bit. Typically, I was embedded on client site for about 12 months doing really stressful projects. I decided to specialize in rescuing failing projects for some crazy reason. And so between those projects, just to sort of decompress, I started visiting vineyards, started a blog, and that turned into Wine Cellar Door, which, like you said, is a resource for visiting vineyards. And then more recently just started working with wineries to help them improve their direct-to-consumer sales. So some building websites, some consultancy.
So what I'd love to hear from you, Elizabeth, and maybe not right now, is why things fail. One always hears about success stories are easy to come by, but I'd like to know what were the hurdles that people have fallen over, and how can the next generation not fall over them. And Andre, over to you.
So as some of you know, I'm actually, my background is actually in computer science engineering. I was not part of the wine world when I was studying. Actually, I didn't even drink wine when I started. And then at some point, I read a book called The Long Tail by Chris Anderson. He was the editor of a magazine called Wired, and The Long Tail, for some reason that I still don't know why, explained why films and music were, of course, being entering a different reality with a different market with the internet. And for some reason that I still don't know, I thought wine was connected. I was not connected to wine. And so I thought, yes, the long tail makes all the sense in wine. Let me see if I can try something. And that's when in 2005, I started something called The Dega, was one of the two social networks in wine at the time. And then as the project moved forwards, I started doing physical events to connect the digital network to the physical world. And immediately we thought that if we could connect both, maybe we could help producers sell more wine. And so today it's actually quite a big network, and it works mainly for Portuguese producers and in Portugal. But what it does, it not only promotes Portuguese wine, but it actually connects the consumers and the producers to a level that we just launched the marketplace, and now we help producers get directly to the consumers, and they can connect, not only, of course, presenting their stories and what they do, but also, of course, selling wine, which is their most important thing.
So I think one of the things to say, and I remember looking at this on the first day, is the Jack Ma line. I remember Jack Ma of Alibaba being asked, he was sort of opining and said, the future is not online. And the room all went very quiet, because obviously Alibaba is an online business. And he said, the future is not offline. And then everyone looks confused, and he says, it's both. And so one of the things I think is interesting to me is how do wine businesses today that are offline, by definition, because everybody started offline, how do they actually look at integrating both sides? Because you're not going to switch from being totally offline to totally online, but there are different sets of disciplines and different ways of thinking across the two routes to market effectively. Polly, do you want to look at that?
I think that we're really looking at the elephant in the room, which is how do we sell? Oh, am I there? How do we sell a product like wine to someone who has never tasted it, never interacted with it, never had that hand sell one-on-one experience? So that's always the first challenge. But then the second part of that question is also, I really think it comes down to the very basics, which is pricing. If you look at something like the US, where they have margins that are based on a 3-tier system, most of these wineries don't have the financial capacity to start taking on a lot of what customers are demanding for what you're talking about, which is an omni-channel experience. Lots of different words for that. So for the first question, how do we sell wine online, I don't think that any of us have a great answer for that. And if we did, we would be gazillionaires. But I do think that one of the things we've got to stop doing, and I'm super loud about this, is we've got to stop talking. We've got to stop showing pictures of hands with grapes. We've got to stop showing pictures of soil. We have to stop talking about it as a product and instead actually do what every other industry is doing and what spirits and what beer is doing, which is talk about it as part of someone's lifestyle. So that's the big key, I think. I'd love to hear what Elizabeth and Andre have to say about that.
Working for a lot of fashion brands, you wouldn't dream of having a fashion website without people wearing the dresses, would you?
No, I think there's an interesting thing. If I could just interrupt here, the fascinating thing is in France, under the French loi et vin, you're not allowed to show people enjoying wine in any adverts or any promotional material. The fascinating thing is I then went and analyzed the Wine Spectator and Decanter, neither of which are constrained by French laws. And even in their traditional analog advertising, the default tends to be vineyards, barrels, bottles. So it's actually not, with the exception of the champagne houses and a few other exceptional people, normally the default tends to be product or where and how it's made. And that seems to be, forgetting the digital side of it, it seems to be part of the way we see it. I mean, you've come from other worlds. How do you feel about that? I've just unmuted you. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, as I say, with a fashion brand, you'd show the product, but you'd show people wearing it, and that's exactly the same, isn't it? You know,
but when you're talking to the trade now or the industry now, how do you find when you discuss this sort of thing?
I think the issue, particularly in the UK, is budget for photography. As simple as that. And what we try to do is balance sort of photography with training. We do a sort of half-day thing where we'll take some photos and teach you, because you can't call a photographer and go, oh, there's a lovely rainbow in my vineyard. But equally, as you say, the people enjoying it, you know, we're saying you need a professional photographer, but if you got some attractive friends, you know, get those around. So it's literally, you know, people look at a website and they see beautiful pictures more than we see the technical aspects, but you know, lots of people just see the pretty pictures, but those have to be paid for, unfortunately.
So Andre, I mean, you're in a country where, of course, that's we don't have as many barrels, and we have some barrels and vineyards here, but obviously far fewer than you have in Portugal. Is that changing in Portugal? Because I've looked at Portuguese wine magazines and so on, and I don't think they look that different to the picture that I was.
Portuguese magazines don't look that different, but actually I can share a practical tip of something that we've done on Adega that has been one of the most initially challenging and now most adored things that we do at the events, and something that after 10 years we still use, and we still use some of the stuff that we did in the beginning. It's called a photo booth. So our events have around 1,000 people. People go to these events to meet around 70 producers. And what we have is that we have our photographer, Ricardo, who has been working with us for many years. And from the beginning, he set up this photo booth. And the photo booth is strategically located at the exit of the event. So yes, it's a wine event. People are happy. Of course, by the end of the event, people are very happy and they want to participate in this photo booth with their friends. Producers, wine producers come with their bottles. By the end of each of our events now, we have around 700, 800 photos done in some fun way. Some of them, of course, then we ask people if we can share them, and we share them on social networks, and we make an album on Facebook and all that. But more importantly, when the topic is how do we promote the next event? How do we promote a producer when we want to sell his wines on the marketplace? And what we do now is that we then use those photos to make all the promotion and all the marketing for the online sales. And what happens is that, of course, a photo that was taken at the end of a wine event full of friends, hugging those friends, or sometimes just the producer with the bottle upside down, something that is way more interesting than a photo session that was made, in a gray morning because we had to do it that day. And so, of course, what I would give as a practical tip is, if you have a winery and you can actually get people to visit you, or a bunch of friends, like Elizabeth said, if you have a bunch of friends and you can convince them to do, like, let's do a tasting, let's have fun. And then maybe towards the end of the event, maybe do a photo session, make it fun, really create a photo booth, and then you have lots of pictures. Do ask for permission to use those pictures. That's very important. That's key. But if you have that, then you have a lot of material that you can work on. I can say that we now have, we've done 30 wine markets so far, and 30 times 700 photos. That's the amount of photos that we actually manage. I can also say that we actually manage those photos through Google Photos. And the reason we do that is because Google Photos has this half creepy, half useful feature, which is it recognizes people. So it can show you all the photos that includes, in our case, one single producer. And so what we have is, if we want to do a promotion using one of our wineries, we can actually find at least one person from that winery, and then we can find all the pictures, of course, where he's included. And so very quickly, we can not only find pictures of him, but we can select, edit, do all that, and then use it on our website.
I think
can I jump in? Can I jump in on that? Another thing that we noticed, because we always ask for a repo of photos or video or whatever we can get, is that a lot of wineries are not doing some basic systems things. So here's an example that we see all the time. Wineries who love Instagram don't actually create folders of all of those photos that they can pass on to service providers, whether it's someone who's doing their social media, someone doing their website, someone doing their EDM, email, newsletters, whatever. So actually just some basic systems, and make it a habit. If you've got to learn how to do it, go out every single day and just snap one photo, just one per day, pop it in a repo. We did a project where we had 14 gigabytes worth of photos and videos, and it was amazing to work with. And the results were cheaper than if we'd had to hire, obviously, anyone to produce all that. And just an incredible story of the winery, because it was like 20 years worth of photos.
And he has something that I would add. It's critical for most of the projects that we know. Might not work for some of the others, but it works for most, which is authenticity. And so if you have all those photos and you can actually use something to tell your story, you don't even need to write a lot. You're sharing your own story. It's something authentic. It doesn't need, and probably shouldn't be, perfect.
Can I just chip in something I've seen done in China, and I haven't seen done once in Europe, is actually having a photo booth in terms of wine tourism, in which you create e-postcards. And so basically you have people actually having a nice photograph of themselves, enjoying themselves in your winery, which they then send to their friends, and you can even print them and make real postcards. And again, you can get permission to use those. I've got a question from Wink Lorch, which is, I think, timely. Given that the Wink Lorch, by the way, for those who don't know her, is a wine writer who actually was a pioneer in self-publishing a book on the wines of the Jura in the east of France, which she did through a Kickstarter campaign. Given that the wine trade, in particular wine producers in Europe, has been very slow to take up the use of various internet tools to market their wines, both B2B and B2C, despite many being around for 5 to 10 years or more, do you think that from this crisis, more producers might discover that these methods might be both time and cost effective and are not so hard to use? And I guess both you, Polly, and you, well, all three of you, I guess, have clients that you might be talking to, or might be, are you getting different kinds of calls at the moment from people who are now discovering the Zoom technology we're using and other technologies that they may not have been thinking about in the past? Elizabeth, have you had that? I'm just going to unmute you. Yeah. You're muted. Yeah. Hold on. Go ahead. Yes, go ahead. Other way. Sorry, Elizabeth. Sorry, you're still mute. Go ahead now.
I think we're getting both ways. We had one quite big project for later in the year, which has already been postponed because the winery knows what's going to happen to their revenue. And we've had other clients saying, oh, can we do this now? Can we do this? Can we do this? So I think some people are just dealing with the day-to-day, and then over the next few weeks, they will come to do more digitally. Some who were sort of on that path have speeded up, and some who are looking to get on a more professional e-com path later and had budget put aside for it, and now finding they need that budget for something else. So I think there's all shades of the spectrum over here.
Andre,
Elizabeth, hold on. Can I ask Elizabeth a question?
Go ahead.
Because you had technology behind you and your team, you guys were able to really jump in and create a shop almost overnight. Isn't that right? Can you just talk a little bit about that? Because I think, and then we'll get back to Robert's question, but I think that that's really interesting to show that, you can work fast to solve an immediate problem. Andre did the same with his events.
We had WooCommerce on our site already, so the tool was there. We were using it for other things. We have some of the supplier services we sell through WooCommerce, so that was to one side. So we just created a separate category, and I've been thinking about different ways of doing it for a while, and then I decided. So each of our member producers, we asked them for a mixed case, because that's the issue when you're ordering from one producer. So that you don't want 6 or 12 wines that you never tried before. So we insist on a mixed case. And then we built the shop. We made the imagery as consistent as possible on the shop page and on the product detail page. But the buy now button is effectively a free affiliate link. So once you're committed, you just go straight to the producer's website and you transact there. So because in WooCommerce, you're allowed to have an affiliate product, we just use that feature. So that's why it was so quick and easy.
Oh, that's really clever.
That's very neat, actually. Andre, unless you'd like to... Andre, you're muted.
I was going to say that I think we're going through the gold rush of digital wine. What has happened in the last couple of weeks is that a lot of producers who were not paying attention to digital are suddenly paying attention to the only channel that is allowing them to reach clients. So we've all seen a number of producers starting to do live Instagram tastings. We've all seen a lot of producers who didn't have an online shop, either opening an online shop or starting to work closer with marketplaces or online shops that were already doing business with them. While this is something that I've expected for a long time, I think this is going to be like a bump. If you could put on a graph the digital transformation in wine, you'd see a very big jump here. At the same time, of course, it comes with the perils of working with digital when you don't have the skills and you might not have the best experience doing it. And what I would say is that if you don't have those skills, you shouldn't try to get someone who happens to know a bit about digital to help you. You should actually get professional help. And it's probably the best investment you'll ever do in getting to clients is doing that.
We refer to that as my nephew built my site. Like every winery has a nephew who built their site.
And I think that if I could just chip in here, this may well be a time, given the fact that a lot of people are locked up with their 17-year-old sons and daughters, we may see a lot more of that going on in these weeks than we've seen elsewhere. I'd like to ask Karen Jenkins if she can, if her phone is working, if she's working on her phone. Karen, I could read your question, but can you see if you can ask your question? Can we hear you? Karen? Okay, I will ask it for her. So Karen is very much focused on helping, based in the UK, helping small family producers getting to grips with the absolute basics in support of their wines with or without an importer. In her previous experience as an importer working with many traditional producers, it was often a challenge to get wine information, and what was offered wasn't always relevant in terms of images, bottle shots, and so on. So this is what we really hear about other people. So then she goes on to say, people's understanding of pricing models when working direct with the markets can be an issue also. Some of the producers in Portugal Wine Week, Andre's initiative, demonstrated a good understanding of how this could impact on working DTC and combining this with other routes to market over time. Managing and the viability of costing logistics is an area in reality that I think many people will struggle with. I think, Elizabeth, this may well be something you would like to address. You're still muted. Go ahead.
I used to teach an online selling course for wine producers, and when I said you can sell the wine at retail, there was surprise. I think people have got their heads around that now. They were somehow not realizing how much more margin they would get from selling direct to consumer. But of course, they've got more costs as well. So I'm really the implementation. I'm not really the expert on pricing models, to be honest.
Andre, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would say two things. One is something that we definitely need to talk about when we talk about direct-to-consumer, which is channel conflict. And it's something that is in the mind of most of the producers. Whatever you propose to a producer that hasn't been selling direct, if he wants to sell direct, he'll tell you, oh, but what is going to happen with my distributors? What is going to happen with the shops that already sell my wine? And there's a lot of things that you can do, and we can do almost another session on just working on and talking about channel conflict. But there's a lot of things that you can do. You can have a number of products that are only for sale on your website and not on your distributors lists or other shops. You can do pricing that maybe they can't. There's a number of things you can do. One of the things that I think is the most important is that you don't look at DTC as a competitor to all the other shops, but that is actually something that can be complementary, as long as you're not, of course, underpricing your distributors or underpricing other shops. Then you should be okay. Of course, if you're going to promote your own DTC channel, why not promote the shops in some area that you think is relevant for your business? So don't look at this as something that is competing. That's I think it's one of the most critical things in addressing, of course, making your own shop. And the other thing, of course, and Polly was mentioning this earlier, is that just before this started, we were having this conversation about traffic. If you're considering doing something to start with, just start selling DTC, and you think that by the moment you open your shop, then you're done and there's nothing else to do, you just reached the bottom of the mountain. And it's a really, 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 really big mountain. And most of climbing up this mountain is about letting people know that your shop exists. And in a world where acquiring, as we all know, acquiring customers is hard enough offline, acquiring customers digitally, it's expensive, it's difficult, you need to have the skills. And that's, I would say, 95% of selling online now.
I think that's a very good point. I think just to add on to what you're saying, I think one of the things I've seen is a lack of transparency. So you've actually had wineries suddenly deciding to start an online shop and not communicating with their existing routes to market. And then suddenly they get an angry call, which actually isn't warranted because they may not be competing with in any sense. But suddenly the shop that they were selling to or a distributor somewhere was saying, hey, you're now competing with me. So I think that...
You know what, Robert, that's not just transparency. That's also communication. So one of the things that we have to think about in the pricing model is that there was never margin built in for the things that we're asking for right now. Social media. Who runs the social media for a winery? Out of whose profits and margins does that come? Well, you're not asking your distro and your retailers to run it. That means you have to do it. So if you have good relationships with your channels, what you're doing is you're explaining my ability to make this margin from these items that I sell direct to consumer means that I can up my communication. I can up my social media profile. I can build brand awareness in a way that we all know that running up to your local bottle shop is still the convenience factor, generally first port of call for many, many wines. You're serving the whole market with that extra money.
Karen has just added that there's a huge distinction between selling in your country and selling for export DTC. You have to understand the margin differences in the first place, which isn't evident. And that's something that people like you will go through with them, but I'm not sure. And it should be pretty obvious to producers if they sit down and think about it, but I don't think it always is thought through.
I just wanted to add that one of the things that the first phase is a lot of the producers don't understand what kind of margin is released when they're selling direct. But the first thing they do when they discover that they have this margin is not invest on professional help, is actually make a discount.
Yeah.
If I can have all this money, why don't I do discounts? I have screenshots of all the shops that came into my Instagram feed in the last few days during promotion for wine. And 9 out of 10, they don't introduce the shop, they don't introduce the product, they don't do lifestyle pictures, they don't do anything. They say, I have a discount if I buy from them. I don't even know them. And I'm already being offered a 25% discount on their products. Yeah. That's what they're using to get you. And this is where the problem also starts. Because if you're worried about conflict of channel and what you're doing is giving discounts of 25% on your own shop, that's a problem. You don't need to start with discounts. Do discounts when people are buying a lot from you, because then it's about loyalty. Don't do discounts, promote value.
That's very well said. I'd like to ask Bryan, and I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce your name correctly. It's either Bryan Houde or Houde. I apologize if I've got it wrong. But Bryan, how do I pronounce it to start with?
I mean, it's Houde, actually. That's all right.
Houde. There you go. That's the one thing I didn't try. And you are working with Nicole Rollet at LAINE Bleu down in southern France.
That's correct.
And you've got, I think, quite an involved question. Are you happy to ask it yourself?
Are you talking about what I just put in the message or what I emailed earlier?
Yeah.
Yes, I was saying one of our big scary things is, because we're doing exactly what we're talking about here, is trying to implement a direct-to-consumer e-commerce platform for France, obviously, but then also for some of our foreign markets. And one of the things that's really scaring us is jumping into a market during, especially in this time, with what's going on in the current situations, where retailers and wine shops and this kind of stuff are obviously fighting extra hard and having to keep their consumers involved. And here we are jumping in saying, look at us, we're here, and we're going to probably sell for around the same retail price as you can find elsewhere, but we're the producer, which means that we have a bit more of that street cred, a bit more of the authenticity, because we've done the social media, we've done everything else. But I don't want to scare my retailers into, this sort of negative position of they're stealing my customers.
Can I ask a question, Bryan?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's look at the logic behind this. If your retailers were selling your wine, like tons of your wine at great prices, you've got good terms, communication is fabulous, would you be prioritizing D2C right now? I think that's a big part of the conversation that we have to have when we're talking about D2C, is that we've got a lot of channels that we don't feel like are working well for us as an individual winery. Maybe what we're saying to them is, guess what? We're going to take control of this because we're the only people who are going to care this much about selling our wine and about the customer experience that our drinkers get.
That's a really interesting point, and actually very poignant in that sense. I like the idea that, of course, we are the ones doing sort of the backbreaking work of building our brand and talking about all the great things about us. We're not just a wine in a portfolio of other wines. So you do make a point. I guess maybe back to the idea of communication and or just simple desire for brand development. Who wants to play ball and who's just out there to sell, I guess is an interesting point. And I guess it comes down also to which country it is and how much penetration you have in that market, maybe.
Right.
I think that's a fair point.
Bryan, I just wanted to make another point about, again, channel conflict and something you can do that maybe your retailers don't do, but they're not even interested in doing because they work with so many other producers. Instead of giving a discount, or instead of doing something that will annoy your retailers, why not think of, you work with some very beautiful labels. Why don't you do a postcard that is actually using the design that you have on one of the labels? Or why don't you do a tote bag or something that actually adds value to the package that you're sending to that client? It's actually also building a relationship that the retailer is not going to do for your brand. And it's actually not giving a discount, so you're not worried about competing with them.
No, absolutely. We're having this conversation this afternoon about sort of the added value we can give. That's not just the product itself, but I think specifically the term we use. I just wrote it down here the other day because I thought it was really the surprise and delight effect that we use in hospitality.
Thank you, Bryan. I'd like to pass over to Sarah Phillips from LiveX, who's got a question. Sarah, go ahead.
Hi, Robert. Thank you. I was interested in Polly's point earlier about sort of gathering lifestyle photos of the wine, which I think is, it's a good point, and I agree with it. But something that struck me as interesting is I see a lot of criticism of wine influencers, particularly by the wine trade and the wine press, and they could be potentially quite a good source of this sort of photography. And I was sort of wondering what you thought about that, and is there actually possibly a role for them there?
Andre, you take good photographs anyway. What do you think about influencers?
I've been called an influencer. No, I'm joking. I think influencers are has in any other area. We were talking about fashion earlier. They're so important in fashion, and I don't think we should dismiss them like we usually do in our discussion about wine influencers. Yes, you can have great wine influencers and not so great wine influencers, but we shouldn't focus, of course, on the not so great. And actually, this is a great point by Sarah, that if you can't hire a photographer, if you can't do photography because you cannot do the setup, you don't know how to do it, do outsource that job. And that job can actually be outsourced to an influencer who does great photography. And look at that. You can actually see what kind of photography they do, because their portfolios are their Instagram accounts and Facebook accounts and all. So you can actually pick what you want to do. And then it's just all about human connection. Send them an email. Say, would you be interested in doing this with us? And a lot of the people I've contacted and had a relationship in the past in those terms have been really nice. Some of them are interested, of course, in being paid. That's what they do. It's their job to be an influencer. But some people are only interested in getting a case of wine and would be happy to share the high definition photos with you. It's all about asking them. Go ahead, try asking them. But I think wine influencers are part of the future of wine online for sure.
I think that if I can say that, having spent a certain amount of time in China in recent times, not very recent, what we've seen there in terms of the importance of influencers is perhaps the future of what we're going to see in the West. The people like Lady Penguin, who are hugely 2 million followers and selling a fair amount of wine. And I don't think we've yet even scratched the surface of what influencers will end up doing.
I wanted to add something about this and live chats on Instagram. One of the things that I've seen, of course, we've all seen happening, that we open Instagram at the end of the day and it's like you cannot see who has made stories. It's full of live tastings and live chats and everything. Wine tastings didn't become interesting because they're live now. So most of them are as boring as they've ever been. So people are not going to follow them. They're not interesting. The thing is, I've seen not many, but a few producers starting to connect those live tastings with their online shop, or actually giving access to a private tasting based on people who bought wine on their website. So suddenly we have a connection between these two things, and now it makes sense. Maybe then we can go and work with some influencer because he can do a live tasting to his audience. So you'll be putting your winemaker into their audience. But of course, you have to respect the kind of communication he does. And most of the times, they don't do communication that it's about technical details and how good the product is. They do communication, like Polly said, of how your wine fits into his audience lifestyle. And that's very important to keep in mind.
I think it's quite useful, without going too far off topic. FABIEN LAINE is here, who knows quite a lot about what's fake and real influence. FABIEN, do you want briefly to pitch in on this?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, so I've been doing a lot of research for wine brands and appellations and so on, and also done a lot of reporting in terms of what works and doesn't work on Instagram, for example. And it's very hard today to find real wine influencers in a way. The best ones that I've found are not wine people. They're mostly food people, sports people, or things that don't relate actually to wine most of the time. So
I think that's a very interesting point. I think the thing I would say is actually, I think we've gone through the time of treating, because I used to be a wine critic for a newspaper. If you had a newspaper to your name, people took you seriously, even though you may or may not have helped sell wine. Today, we then moved to bloggers, and now we move to influencers. And I think we're seeing a very little sophistication from producers. They're so desperate to talk to someone.
Can I just talk about this for a minute? And I imagine Elizabeth, who does a lot of implementation, can talk about this as well. I think what we've hit upon, though, is the foundation that often isn't created when people go into digital, which is you need to know what metrics you are trying to achieve, and you need to know how you're going to measure them. So it's specific to influencers. What we see is that influencers are often very good at selling themselves, but actually in many cases cannot provide the measurables that would show a winery, yes, I am a natural match for what you know about your audience. So there's two sets of measurements going on there and a nice tidy Venn diagram that sits in the middle. So whether it's influencers, whether it's social media advertising, Facebook ads, whether it's Google ads, we need to know who our people are, and we need to know how we're going to measure whether or not the investments we're making are going to bring us our people. This is exactly the same as old school print media ads. You know, we would know who their readership was. We would ask these questions before we'd write a check for a page in a magazine.
Elizabeth, you've got something to add here, I think.
Yeah, I was just looking at different winery Instagram accounts recently to pull some material together for a course. And there was a post from the winery, and then somebody chipped in and said, I can't wait for my wine club delivery. And that was ignored. And it was a 6-month-old post, so it wasn't something that had happened yesterday. So for the budget conscious wineries and people starting out, there are people out there talking about your stuff, and we don't even see wineries engaging with those quite often. If somebody had gone back to say, hey, yes, we can't wait to send it out to you, post a picture when it arrives, that's free content. It's just there, it's easy, it's free. And treating your own, we don't have so many club members in the UK because clubs are less common, but treating your own club members as influencers, it's not just about going out there and big PR companies and paying people. There's engaging with your tribe.
It was the cleverest thing, I think, that one of the clever things that Naked Wines did from the beginning was actually really putting pressure onto their producers with their weekly stats and so on. You're not talking enough, you're not answering enough, and so on. Rika Harros, who is a producer, family producer in the northeast of Italy. Rika, would you like to chip in?
Yes. Hi. Good evening, everyone. I have two questions, and most of you in the panel know my business, so it's straight to the point. How can a winery like mine that sells mostly to foreigners deal with regulatory issues across Europe? Let's say if I put an e-commerce site up in Italy and I get an order from Sweden, let's say, how can a winery make sure to comply with EU regulations? Because at one point, it's either going to cost me too much to limit who can see my e-commerce, and then it's not worth it, or I let everyone see it, and then I hit the wall of the EU regulations. So how can a winery deal with this practically?
Who's raising? Andre, are you raising your hand for this? Yes, go ahead.
Pauline?
No, Andre, go for it.
It's complicated. It's not easy, especially if you're talking about a small to medium winery and you don't have the money to invest in lawyers and the system. And one of the things I've seen, we've all seen in the US, you do have a couple of services that do ship compliant stuff for you. You pay them and they take care of it. And in Europe, we don't have that. At the same time, what you see in Europe is that it's not legal, but you do see a lot of people just ignoring that and flying below radar, which I do not recommend at all, but it happens. And especially if you're sending the occasional shipping, there's a chance that it won't happen. But if you want to do it as a business, of course, there's no easy way. And you do have to either, as you know, set up companies in different countries. And for a small winery, that's a no-go. That's almost impossible. Or something that should happen more often in the wine world, which is wineries collaborate. So if you actually have wineries that are not, they don't have products that are competing with you, why not get together and try to do then that for a specific country where you think will work? As a generic option, I don't think there's a solution at the moment.
I did ask Michael if he wanted to jump in. So if anybody sees him raise his hand, let me know. I'm maybe about to speak out of turn on this, but it's in regard to Reika's question and Andre, what you just said. I know that in the past, we have had to, here's a really good example that I think applies. We've had to create very elaborate geolocation systems that can show alternative pricing, that can show alternative call to actions. There are various ways that you can do this within a site build. I think the really important question that this brings up, though, that is about e-commerce, thank you, Adam, I saw your message down there, is that you need to, when you're working with the developer, you need to be very clear from the beginning about what your specifications are, because often what happens, and this is coming from our experience building sites like this, is that you get into the project planning and someone said, I need an e-commerce site, and you start to build it out, and holy shit, you suddenly find out that really you need an e-commerce site that can sell to multiple different markets, and you've got clubs and, you know, all these parts that then take a very simple site into something that is very big and can become very expensive. So it doesn't answer your question, except to say that I agree with Andre. It's very complex, but good, clear communication and specifications from the beginning will allow you to get to that end result faster and cheaper than anything else.
I've got it. Sorry, go ahead. Anyone?
And then my second question would be, if a winery can't afford an e-commerce site, what other viable and effective alternatives can they consider?
One of the things I've seen in mostly in Germany, I've seen wineries without a website have an online form. It's not a website, it's a form. You can do it on Google Forms, you can do it on other systems that are very easy. You don't even need to process the payment there. You just need something that you can send a client who asks, where can I buy your wine? Here's a link, use this form. And the form is a copy of any price list you have that allows people to add the number of bottles and say, he presses the submit button, you get an email. From then on, you do it by email. For a small winery, there's more than enough to do business.
Andre, does anybody on the panel have experience of people who are actually using Amazon as their e-commerce platform and not doing very much beyond that?
So we did years back when Amazon was still selling wine in the States. And I, you know, in terms of specifics, I can't really get into it, but I just remember that they were always pissed off and they were never happy. The content was never up to date. The prices were never great. It was not a positive experience for the winery at all.
Okay, that was just a... Nicole Rolle's got a question, and I'm going to bring Fabien back.
Wait, before Nicole asks her question, can I answer Reika's question really quickly?
Yeah.
You know, a really good way to do that is that Stripe will, or PayPal, but Stripe is generally better now. Stripe will allow you to set up products and even recurring payments within the Stripe system, and MailChimp will allow you to set up landing pages to collect information. Set up a MailChimp account, a MailChimp landing page, collect their emails, send out email links with purchasing ability, buy now buttons in your emails, and take it from there.
We're talking tomorrow.
Thank you for that. Fabien Lin has got a solution that he's said that somebody's been doing in France. Would you like to say what you've actually said on the chat, Fabien?
Yeah, so it's very simple. It's in the Languedoc region because I collaborate with a lot of producers there. So basically, they've been just collaborating, 9 of them for now, but they plan to be a little more. And basically, they just created a very simple website where people can order wine directly from them. And if they order a minimum of 2 cases, 2 boxes, they get free shipping. And they were smart enough also to introduce a tiny place for newsletters, so they can also keep tracking of who's interested to have news from them. So
thank you, Fabien.
It was done in 1 day. So
thank you very much. Andre.
I've seen I had the chance of doing a road trip in the US last year, and I went from Vancouver to Los Angeles, and I visited a number of shops and a number of places that were wine related. And one of the most surprising things I've seen in the US was the concept of a wine collective. And what I see was a number of young winemakers who didn't own land, so they were buying grapes, but they needed to get to the consumer. And what they've set up, and I've seen a number of them, it was just not just one, but I've seen a number of wine collectives where they had a wine bar, they had a place to make wine, and they had some sort of group communication. I don't see a reason why this shouldn't happen in a website also. They can get together and share the shipping and share the communication and share the cost of actually doing a website and doing all the photography and doing all that.
Polly, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think as Polly said, there were some pretty dodgy websites out there built by 17-year-olds. But using WordPress, WooCommerce templates, or Squarespace or Shopify, it's a lot of work. I'm not saying it's not a lot of work, but if people have got the time and the inclination and the skills, then those tools you can certainly start out and learn and then migrate to something more complex later. But don't use one of the other tools that are advertised late at night on TV as being free and instant, because you'll hit the buffers very quickly.
One of the questions I'd ask is actually about strategy, because I think there's probably a lot of people sitting around now stuck in their homes thinking, what am I going to do? And I think quite often there's a kind of knee-jerk response, which is kind of what you're referring to here of, oh, now I'm going to start this, without thinking it through. Can I have a few thoughts on how you would actually strategize moving into e-commerce if you've not been doing it before? Setting expectations, setting a program. Who's going to run the thing? How are they going to run it?
I would actually say Rekka is the person who can answer this better. She's all about strategy, and this is a question I would say she can answer better than anyone else.
Rekka, you're there. Just unmute yourself. Go ahead.
I'm here. I was a bit distracted by leaving a message on the chat. Sorry about that. What was the question about strategy?
Strategy, basically, if people who aren't doing it and are going to begin to do it, or have been only vaguely or half-heartedly doing it, how do you really get into building an e-commerce platform for your winery from scratch?
Well,
I'm not talking about mechanics. I'm talking about strategy and the thinking through. Who's going to run it? How's it going to be run?
Well, I think the first thing to understand is, what do clients want and need? And can the winery offer anything to satisfy that need? And if their need is to buy online because they're further away and they want that kind of service to have the wine delivered, then that's what they need to do. So it's putting the customer first and not the business first. And then build everything around that, around their needs. And that's how they should go. If the answer is build an e-commerce site, and you do the maths and you go into your Excel sheets and you have to go through that process of calculating all the costs involved in servicing your clients. And if it makes sense, then that's what you do. If it doesn't make sense, you need to find alternatives. It's something that most businesses, not just wineries, struggle thinking about the long-term effect of what they do. Because of the times that we're living, we're thinking very short-term, that what is now and what comes back in as return on investment within few weeks, few days, maximum 3 months. And we forgot to think about the long-term. The over 3 months, over 6 months, what's the result in 1 year? And that's what I would suggest for wineries to start doing, thinking more long-term. And how does that look like? And how do I get to my customers? Is that through e-commerce? Does it make sense economically? Then do it, invest in that. The results will come.
Elizabeth. Thank you, Rekka.
I think in general, running an e-commerce site and growing it and growing the audience is more work than a lot of people realize. But we have got clients doing amazingly well, but underpinning it all is growing their email list, really. I mean, you've got to have a solid e-commerce site, because to me, all that extra work of bringing in the traffic is actually more work, and there's no point in doing all of that advertising and marketing and everything to bring them to a site that's not any good. But people here seem very shy of growing their email list, and that's the easy win with bringing in traffic. But if we know people with email lists of 8,000 doing really well, and people with email lists of 150 wondering why they're not selling anymore, and we're like, well, do you capture those emails?
To me, actually, it's amazing visiting wineries even today, how little effort is being made in those wineries to know who's been in and what they've looked at. I find that the New World, Australia is pretty good at it. California, they're trying to sign everybody up to something. But in Europe, I think we're slow at it.
I'll share a number that might incentivate people to start collecting those emails. We did this experiment, I think was 2 years ago, that we spent €1,000 on each different channel to promote the Adega Wine Market in December. And so we spent €1,000 on Facebook / Instagram, €1,000 on making sure that we had better results on Google, and €1,000 on doing proper content for our email list. And surprisingly for us at the time, we got almost no return on social media marketing. So the part of advertising or social media advertising. So the €1,000 that we spent on Facebook and on Instagram brought us almost no clients. The €1,000 that we spent on the mailing list, which is something that we've worked quite well for a long time, but improving it, we saw an improvement on sales. So the difference for social media was massive. And the €1,000 on making sure that a website is well referenced on Google, and even if you do a little bit of AdWords, spending money there and making sure that it works, was the best channel by far. And of course, sometimes we get lost on social media because it's made in a way that is so attractive for us to spend a lot of time looking at it. But the fact that people in general, if you look at the statistics, don't buy following social media links. They might even, one of the things we're wondering at some point is, do people come from social media, search on Google, and then find a website on Google? You still need to do both. So you need one for awareness and the other one, of course, to be found. But what we've seen in the numbers is that if you want to spend €1,000 on doing something well, do it €1,000, maybe do it, yes, if you want to spend €2,000, do 1,000 on Google and do 1,000 on making sure that your mailing list, collecting emails, making sure you have great photography, send a regular email. I've used this example a number of times. Some people here know of course, this project. Chateau Bauduc has been doing their direct-to-consumer business for a long time, even before many of us talked about internet and wine, and they've been doing it so well with an excellent newsletter that they send regularly, updating on family affairs and how things are going. Just that simple.
Can I interrupt? We have Gavin Quinney of Chateau Bauduc in the audience. I don't know if Gavin would actually like to say a few words on that, because the fascinating thing, I'm going to bring Gavin up to the top. He's coming up.
So while you're bringing Gavin in, can I just say that we have, so we talk about this a lot where we say social is for sharing and email is for asking. I don't actually want people using their social media to ask me to do something or to ask me to give them money. I like for that to come through. And it's supported by data. I mean, we all know that email is still our most effective ask out there. So if you can just confine it to a space where someone has given you permission to ask them, you're better off. Yeah, yes, I'll shut up now.
Gavin, are you happy to say a few words on what you do? Are you there? You may be.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. And the point about you, Gavin, is in the sense, and I'm glad Andre mentioned it, you've been doing your direct to the UK business from France for a long time, and so few people seem to have followed in your footsteps.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfectly.
Oh shit, I've got a boat in the background.
And we can see the boat. Is that how you ship your wines?
No. I'm not an able man, sorry. I think it's absolutely right about email, what Elizabeth and Andre were saying. I've always said sort of fans and sort of followers, likes are for show, but email is for dough, really, because that's where the business is, I think. It's an old line, sorry. I think the newsletter, as Andre says, is important to do that regularly. And I do it once a month and have done for 5 years. So I think that's pretty crucial. I'd like to know, how do you get more people to your mailing list, though? That's what I'd like to know. What are your thoughts? Especially Andre, I think you've got experience there. Obviously, Elizabeth, and clearly Polly as well.
Okay, the ball has been thrown across to you guys. Who wants to answer? Andre's put his hand up first.
Okay. So one of the things I would do, we do events. So one of the things, of course, we can do is collect emails from everyone who goes to our events. And we have this technology called the Smart Wine Glass. So everyone who wants to use it needs to sign up with their email. And so we get not 1,000, but maybe 400 emails, new emails every time we do an Adega Wine Market. But I would say that if you're not doing events regularly, or you don't have a place where you welcome people regularly to taste wines, I would probably try to set up a campaign of talking very practical. I would set up some landing page and say you do a giveaway or do something that people want to pay attention to, and then of course you collect emails based on that. As you, from what I follow for a number of years, have been doing of sharing your story. It really looks authentic. I don't know how authentic it is. I've never met you personally in my life, but it seems as authentic as it can be, even with the problems of sharing everything. And if you can tell that story and make it interesting for people to join, because suddenly you've decided to do a giveaway in the UK, or you've decided, and you know, from what I've heard, you know exactly where your market is in the UK. So imagine you know the area where you want to get more people, or you know an adjacent area where you want to get more people. You can set up a campaign to do a collection of emails there. So you're doing something, do a giveaway that is just for a specific area, and do it to get emails. And that's one of the fastest way. You can do a giveaway, you can give wine, you have wine already in the UK, so it's not difficult for you to set up that part. So do that, and you'll get a number of emails. Some people will sign out. The first time you send an email, they'll say, oh, I just signed up because I wanted to give away, but a lot of them will stay, and you have grown your mailing list.
Thank you.
Elizabeth?
Just from a very basic technical point of view, so many websites, you really have to rummage around to find where your emails sign up. You know, it should be in the footer on every single page. And in terms of pop-ups, so many websites, the pop-up hits you in the face, like, do you want to sign up? And you're like, I haven't even seen your website yet. Could I have a little look through?
Yeah.
So I think pop-ups have their place as long as you can parameterize it so that people have already been on the site or they've looked around. But yeah, as Andre says, competitions and things are great.
Could I just say, Robert, just a thing on the newsletter. So I worked looking through my emails, and obviously what you do have to absolutely have is a really good sort of email platform. I happen to use Campaign Monitor, but of course you can use MailChimp or whatever, but Campaign Monitor has been brilliant, and you get a lot of data from that. And looking back with sort of horror at what they call campaigns, which are basically emails, I see that I've actually written a newsletter at the end of every month apart from December, because I don't think anyone wants I normally send a Christmas card before Christmas, but apart from December, I've written an email at the end of every month for the last 5 years, and that has simply just been a discipline. And Andre, when you're talking about that authenticity, I write that email the day before the end of the month because I'm thinking, oh my God, it's the 30th. Or in the case of this year in February, I was saved because there were 29 days in February. So it was great. So I actually put that together. And I do have a guy or two guys actually based in Chester. So it's not a local thing. They're based up in the north of England. And they always expect my email to come through at about sort of 6 o'clock on the penultimate day of the month. But just having that sort of discipline or habit has put us in good stead. There is another thing that we've done that has happened by accident, and I don't want to give our game away here, but I started off giving away, Andre, you were talking about discounts, I think, especially you were talking about discounts. And the thing to do is not to give too much away in discount, because as soon as you give away 20%, or 25% or 15% or whatever the number is, then I think people will expect that sort of number the next time. Yeah. So what I was very bad at was doing constant offers that you see from so many. I subscribe to all sorts of things, not wine sites necessarily, but all sorts of e-commerce sites. And you're constantly getting deluged with stuff, and sometimes it's just too much. But I was really bad at doing offers, partly because I was sort of saying, would anyone like more of our Sauvignon Blanc? Or at the moment, how about some rosé if the weather turns, or whatever. So there was a limited range of products, but at least we do have a range of products. But I was so bad at doing offers that I started giving everybody their own personal loyalty code. And actually, if you look on Boutique.com, it doesn't say voucher code, it says loyalty code. And I started off doing that. And at first, it seemed like a bit of an error, because I would give them their personal loyalty code, which is always then connected in the emails that I send. So they always are reminded of what their loyalty code is. Some of you might have one. I don't know. I know Sarah Phillips was on earlier. I'm quite sure she's got one. But the loyalty code was easy to remember. And I started doing that. And then it's sort of building up. And then when we changed our e-commerce website, and our e-commerce website is built on the BigCommerce platform, which is very good. I wanted to stop using individual loyalty codes, because it meant I had to create one every time. But each time customers came back and said, my loyalty code doesn't work. I say, yeah, because we've changed the system. But I had to go back to the loyalty code. And we now have 2,500 individual loyalty codes. So people can go to our site and get their 10% discount, which is their right. That's the thing. So they never have to.
Andre's got a hand raised. I just would chip in before he says that. That's something that I've seen happen. I think Australia did, which was a friends and family code, which was supposedly a one-off, and you were just giving it to a few people, and it was handed out slightly more generously, but it was a way of giving one code without saying everybody gets 20% off. Andre?
I have a question and a comment. My comment is, one of the things that we do on Adega is that we give discounts if you spend above a certain level of money in the last 12 months. So we reward loyalty in that sense, instead of rewarding, anytime someone wants to buy wine, they'll get it with a discount. No, it doesn't work like that. So we kind of have a club for people who spend above a certain level of above a certain amount. The question I was going to ask you again, Gavin, is I've heard that Paulie was talking about failure, and we haven't talked much about failure today. But if I remember well, you've had this story in the past where hail hit your vineyards in a serious manner, and from what I know, it was your mailing list and what you've set up at that time that helped you overcome that hurdle. Could you tell us a little bit about how that happened? Sorry that I'm making questions here, but I think
this is the way we work.
Really relevant points.
Kevin.
Yeah, in fact, Robert asked me on a previous thing about on the real wine biz on communication. I didn't answer it very well. I think I was struggling with my kit. Anyway, never mind. I think sometimes people are more interested in the horror stories. In fact, right now in Bordeaux, there's been a bit of frost going around, and I haven't been able to go out and see the frost, like say in. We've had some bad hailstorms here, in particular August 2013. That was really bad. We lost half our crop in about 7 or 8 minutes. That wasn't great. And then back in 2009, that was the first. We'd had hail before that, but we had a really bad hailstorm in May 2009. a great vintage in Bordeaux, but a pretty shit one for us, to be fair, because we lost half our crop in those hailstorms. And I did a little video, and and I really just sort of started building our mailing list there. And I think I think people are just quite interested in hearing, the rough with the smooth. I mean, without doubt, they want to know, and that's the reality of viticulture and winemaking and stuff. So that we tell that story, how good or bad. I'm probably maybe a bit of a gloom merchant when these things come around. The frost in Bordeaux. In April 2017. Bordeaux lost the equivalent against the normal average. Bordeaux lost 300 million bottles of wine, in one very cold morning in late April 2017. And you'd never really know it from the way that Bordeaux reacts. But of course, we sort of tell the story. Actually, the wine was pretty good, and I'd strongly recommend our Reds 2017, which are on our website right now and available.
That's a good plug, Gavin. Actually, you've just opened the door for me to raise a point that Philip Quick has actually put in the chat, which is relevant, which is you, and it's not just talking to you, but I think you're a good example of this, talking about something beyond your business and your winery. You are seen, as it happens, as an authority on Bordeaux in general. Philip's asking whether your knowledge, expertise, and communication about Bordeaux helps bring people into your world. But I'm questioning, I'm seeing more and more people in the wine industry who actually do talk beyond, we've picked some grapes today, we've made some wine, we've won a prize. Can I let Gavin do that first, Polly, and then on to you? Do you think that what you've done about what you're talking about Bordeaux in general has helped you sell your wine?
Yeah, I would have to say that this week today I was supposed to be going to Petrus and Église Clinée and Cheval Blanc and all the rest of it. So I slightly missed that. But I would say that my wife, Angela, who does all the online orders and stuff and processes all the logistics and stuff, so I do all the sort of marketing, and then we get stuck into the absolute detail of the whole thing. So I do the website and stuff, but Angie's the one placing all the orders. We use London City Bond, and we've been going absolutely mad with that. So she's for this very same reason, the dreadful situation that we've dreadful crisis that we have now, the very same reason that the primeurs, the En Primeur campaign is very much on hold, is the reason I'm more about just when we've been incredibly busy. And I'm sure lots of online and home delivery specialists have been incredibly busy, not just in the UK, but our importer in Switzerland, for example, is just, and he's a traditional merchant, and does a lot via brochures and traditional methods of marketing. They're incredibly busy as well. But as for the sort of expertise thing, I'm afraid it's sort of, it's just I'm into this sort of stuff, and as Andre says, I suppose what it comes down to is I think some of my newsletters, when I look at them, at the end of the day, I think, oh my God, for most of our customers, that must be just so boring. If you look at, say, the February one, you'll find it on gavinquinney.com or on boduc.com. If you look at the February newsletter, it's on the Bordeaux 2018 production statistics. And I don't think really most of our customers, who are currently maybe having a glass of Sauvignon or Rosé or whatever, are that interested in the Bordeaux production statistics. But if you look at the detail there in terms of the map on what appellation, what they've produced this year versus last year and so on and so forth. But I'm just sort of quite interested in that stuff. So I'm afraid I can't keep away from it, really. But
it also creates the link between you and Adam Vignola mentioned on the chat line that Randall Graham, who I think we're going to be talking to in a week or so here, made his emails and newsletters about him and his journey in wine. And that was interesting in the news, and the trade consumers flocked to actually follow him. And I think it is that, you said the word earlier, Andre, the authenticity. Whether you think you're being boring, you think you're being interesting, the point is it's you and people who are receiving it actually get used to the messages they get. Polly, you were definitely wanting to jump in there, weren't you?
So I just wanted to say what you were just touching on. So when you do this every month for 5 years, you don't have to hit every one of them out of the ballpark. You know, like that's part of it, is that you can have ones that half your people like, and then you'll have ones that the other half of the people like. But more importantly, I imagine that after you've written these every month for 5 years, that bullshit corporate selling tone that you see in an awful lot of emails is gone. I'm going to assume that it reads like you're just talking to your people, which that's the thing that we notice in successful ongoing email communications, is that it's just, I always describe it as it's a letter to old friends. You know, you cast off the academic corporate tone that often we will assume when we get behind a keyboard, and we just talk about what's really happened in the last month or the last week, and you know, that makes a huge difference to your readership.
I was going to add an example. Our most popular email in the last 15 years of Adega is an email we sent around 3 years ago when we changed the venue of one of our events into a new neighborhood. And the neighborhood is being taken over by all these new buildings. And there's this massive warehouse, wood floor, used to take trains inside. It's a beautiful place. And we sent an email that said, why are we doing the event in this warehouse, and why we're helping save this warehouse? It had nothing to do with wine. It had nothing to do with the event itself. And we had a massive response, and people sharing online and wanting to help us help the place, save the place from being torn out. And it had nothing to do with wine at that point, and it was our most popular email.
I think if I again chip in here, there's one thought. We are all obsessed with wine as wine producers and wine people. I think sometimes, I don't know whether you'd say this, Gavin, but certainly the viral video of how to get a wine cork out of a bottle with your shoe from a producer in Provence.
Stephen
Kronk. He had done a lot of other videos before, and a lot of them were about wine, and he was getting 200, maybe 300, but very often 20 or 30 views. And the most popular things he did, he said, were the olive harvest, which was not about wine, obviously, and how to get the cork out of the shoe. And so maybe there's a lesson for all of us that instead of always focusing about our vineyards and our cellars and what we've done to do with wine, that we actually talk about stuff that goes beyond that and might actually have some resonance with our readers beyond their glass of wine.
Mm.
Have you found that when you've strayed into other areas, Gavin?
Well, the trouble is, I'm not as sharp a marketeer as Stephen Kronk, yes. Mirabeau. If anybody wants to look them up, so very
dynamic,
very, 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 very good. In fact, yeah, Stephen actually came here and interviewed me, and we talked about. I don't think we talked about terroir, but it was something along those lines. It might have been the appellation system or the 1855 classification. I think he probably had about 250 views on that one, which was, then followed up by several million for his how to get the cork out without the use of a corkscrew. But I think that was a little bit of a one-off. I don't think he's doing so many videos now.
I think he's sort of moved on from that a bit.
It must have consumed so much time.
Yeah. I think so. We have 19 minutes past, so I think we're a little bit on the. Maybe should be nearly time to close our doors. Can I just ask my panel, Polly, Elizabeth, Andre, would you like to wrap up with a few words on? We've got quite a lot in the chat, and if you're watching this and have a look down the chat, because there are various things that I haven't necessarily gone into, just little asides, and there are one or two other things there. But just you three, would you like to wrap up? Polly first.
I'm going to put on my sometimes moderator hat and say, to wrap up, I'm going to actually answer Nicole's question because she put it up there a long time ago. Okay, yeah. So Nicole Relay asked, any examples to highlight small to medium wineries doing a really good job on e-commerce? And so I have an example that I love to share of a micro producer in New Zealand who they're called Saorsa. I know I'm not going to to pronounce that right, Saorsa. And they didn't even have a site for the longest time. They handled all of their sales through Instagram DM. And if I can put a link on Twitter, we know we shouldn't put links in Zoom. I'll put a link on Twitter so that you can see it. They are as honest and genuine, and they really give a shit about their customers, you know, like from their packaging through to their communications, their email, the whole thing. So that's a micro, very, very small production, all the way up to a larger independent winery in the States that I'll toot my own horn for a minute, that we just wrapped up, which is Brooks Winery, about whom the American Wine Story movie was made. Their documentary was made several years ago, and they have experiences and events and a huge tasting room and, you know, 71 SKUs and the whole thing. And what I'm going to give them praise for is that they treat it. It is part of the job. You know, it's not a hobby. They have a team who actually runs and cares for it. They get the photos done. They get the videos done. You know, they work on it all the time. And I think that that's an example that a lot of wineries can follow to understand what it takes to make effective e-commerce. Cutting out for a minute, something that we didn't even really get into today is how do we transition these people from POS into e-commerce, you know? So those are just a couple examples.
Polly, we're definitely going to come back to this. So this is the first bite of the cherry. Elizabeth.
Yeah, just coming back to what Gavin was saying about being genuine and authentic, that's actually easier for the small wineries to do. So often the small wineries say, oh, we haven't got this, we haven't got the budget, but they really are out on the ground. I work with Dermot Sugru in the UK, who's one of the most charismatic winemakers around. He just wrote a really heartfelt email the other day. The open rate was phenomenal. I've never seen anything like it. And we were actually getting replies to the email, people going, oh, sorry, you're having such a shit time. We could only afford one bottle at the moment. And it was just incredible. And there's no marketing textbook anywhere near there. That was just totally heartfelt. And then just one other thought, just going back to what Andre was saying about branded items, and then that tying in with the email sign up. There have been tests that show that a free gift is worth more than a discount in terms of conversion rates. And then you're getting people using a glass or a hat with your name on, or, you know, whatever's the right thing for your brand. And again, that's cheaper, but it works better. So that's just another alternative.
Andre.
I was going to actually use an example of a producer who's not selling online, and it's actually a big producer, but they do a great job of connecting emotionally with their customers. And it's a winery called Donna Fugata from Italy. They're in Sicily. They do an amazing job in terms of their website. For me, is one of the most exciting websites in terms of connecting emotionally to their customer base. They even explain what kind of situations some of their wines fit in. Of course, they're also known for their amazing labels and full of colors and all that. But I think the thing that I would like to talk about now is when we think about winery e-commerce, it doesn't need to be that you're selling wines directly. E-commerce can also mean that you're supporting another systems like Elizabeth's marketplace, where you can actually help her sell your wines. So if you're thinking of investing in an e-commerce website for your own winery, and suddenly you think maybe it's not something for me right away, think of actually helping other websites doing a better job of selling your wine. And one of the things that Donna Fugata does is actually have something that I think it's critical for a winery website, which is where to buy these wines. So many winery websites, you go there, you cannot buy direct, and that's okay. But you cannot find information on where to buy a product. This is 2020. Going to a website of a company that has a product and you cannot find where to buy. I saw a winery the other day asking people to Google their name and buy online on a Facebook ad. An ad without a link, it's worth zero.
I think that I can just chip in there because I know this from talking to various people in France. There's a great fear of showing my competitors where my wine is sold. So rather than show my customers where they could buy the wine, which would be useful, I'm more worried about, oh my God, my competitors are going to go to all the people I'm going to sell it. Gavin, you've been promoted to panelist briefly at this moment, as we're just about to close. And I have got a quick question which is relevant to this. French producers who put most of their website and information in French, how would you feel about that? How do you feel about that?
Oh Lord! I mean, our problem is the other way around. We're completely in English, and our back labels are in English. And in fact, we had years ago the Repression de Fraud round because our back labels were in English, but on sale in a French caviste, which they are. But no, I mean it's a big board on that level, and of course what Andre is saying. I mean, we're in Bordeaux. I mean, quite a lot of. I think it's fair to say that quite a lot of the chateaux here. I don't think you'll find where to buy the wines on their websites, probably because as they go through negotiations and several middlemen. Then they probably don't know where the wines are necessarily for sale, but that's a whole different issue. I'm very conscious that our website and all our communications are in English, but the trouble is, as my old boss years ago, a guy called Peter Ogden in a computer company, he used to say, "Stick to the knitting, Gavin. Stick to the knitting." And sometimes, if you just don't have the sort of bandwidth, and right now, for example, just as an example. I don't know if you saw a tweet a little while ago, but there was a lorry driver that turned up and I have to cook him supper. He's in our car park at the moment. He's just loaded 20 pallets of our wine and I've got to go and cook him supper again. So I'll have to do that. But I think sometimes it's horses for, it's really important to do the basics right, and I did try to do partly our back labels in French as well, for example, or part of our website in French, but I didn't get round to completing it, I'm afraid.
Thank you very much for joining us, Gavin, and I'd like to thank Elizabeth, Andre, my working partner on this, Polly, and everybody else who's actually chipped in, turned up. A lot of people have hung around. This video will be up within the next 48 hours, thanks to Polly's mammoth Leviathan efforts in getting these. It'll also be a podcast. Tomorrow we're doing wine tourism. And we have Carolyn Martin from Creation Wines in South Africa, who's an award winner, and I think another couple of people talking about wine tourism then. And we've got some other exciting things happening later in the week. So we're talking to editors on Thursday about we talked to wine writers before, now we're going to talk to the editors this week. So please do head over to the YouTube page and subscribe there and to keep you kept up with what we're doing. Thank you all very much. Stay safe and hope to see you here tomorrow, same time or the night after. And Gavin, happy cooking.
Thank you. Thank you
all.
Mushroom risotto. You'll see it on Twitter.